Hi everyone, it's me, Arden Lee. Today's video is a question from one of the members of the Repatterning Parlor who asks if our neurodevelopmental trauma has impaired our ability to form intimate connections, and if the effects of that trauma have also made it difficult to connect with people because we find ourselves alienating them. How do we go about healing that trauma so that we can start to form healthy relationships? This is a great question. If we believe that we are defined by our trauma for the rest of our lives, we will keep living in those cycles. The overall theme of this question is about the belief in the regenerative power of nature. There are a lot of different methods for this, but I'm going to go to the root of the belief, because the modality that we use to heal our trauma is really more of a personal choice of what's going to work for us. So I'm going to get to some of those options too. But what I want to focus on is this idea that our trauma imprints that were set, especially in our neurodevelopmentally formative years of childhood and adolescence, are going to prevent us from forming intimate connections indefinitely. At some point, we have to make a decision that we no longer want to live in our trauma imprints. And that may sound easier said than done. But when we look at it from the other side, when we've gotten to that place, it actually feels a lot easier than it looked before we made that leap. So if we are continuing to identify with our trauma and to create an identity out of it, I had this happen to me, therefore, yes, absolutely. I can break a bone and therefore I need to be in a cast, right? But what happens when that cast is put on? Something I read from Peter Levine just this afternoon in the middle between uploading these videos, as I'm, typically when I make these videos, I make a video and then as it's uploading, I pick up the book I'm reading and I read until the video is done and I'm ready to make another one. And something I read today from Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine is he points out that when we break a bone, it's not the cast that heals us. The cast creates the container for uninterrupted healing that the body does itself. I want everyone to think about that for a moment. If we go through our lives and we continue to engage in the same patterns and we don't stop and put a container around the places in us that need healing and give it that prioritization and that space and that containment, right? In the same way the cast contains the limb with the broken bone, then it's natural that those same patterns will continue. And it can feel, even when we're aware of these things, it can feel very real to be stuck in them. So the first thing that we need to do is check in with ourselves and ask, do we believe that there is a future for us where we're not stuck in these patterns all the time? Do we believe in the possibility for our bodies and our emotional bodies and our brains to heal and transform? The human body is really incredible. And since I've been on this journey, I've studied a lot about it because I like knowing how things work. I've read a lot about our nervous system, our heart-brain coherence, the way that our stress hormones affect our genes and, things in our down to the cellular level and quite literally down to the atomic level, which would be a lot to unpack in one video, naturally. But do we believe in the miracle of our bodies? Do we believe in the miraculous regenerative power of nature? Let's start talking about modalities. For me, being a pretty mind-based person, understanding how all of it works and how I could make a choice to bring conscious awareness to the patterns that were happening in my life that I wanted to stop, and to put my focus on what I wanted to do instead when those same patterns came up, was incredibly empowering for me. If there is trauma that doesn't want to budge, for me, I go to my energy worker. I found a facilitator who is amazing at removing hidden or trapped emotions from the body that are keeping me in the way of the things that I want to do. And I've been working with her long enough and working on this myself long enough that I've actually gotten to a pretty cool point where I'll text her to set up a session, and in the days before I go into that session, I do so much work on my own mind that sometimes I show up and she's like, oh wow, you got about 85% of this yourself. Let's just move that last bit that is still stuck there. Stuck emotions like grief, frustration, anger, things that are a little stubborn and want to stick in the body. There's and by the way, if you do sign up for the repatterning project, I include an interview with my facilitator as part of the bonus content, because I'm very transparent that although the repatterning project encapsulates everything that I learned in order to facilitate my own healing, part of learning to facilitate my own healing has also been about going to other practitioners when there is something that is beyond my own scope, right? And that's absolutely, how could I tell someone to sign up for my course and get my help and then not advise them to get that same kind of help for other things and in other modalities that they may also need? I love that I've created about the repatterning project. It is an umbrella of learning how to create this process for ourselves, and to be able to make these decisions for ourselves and practice discernment, and from that mind-based place. And that included in that can be the decision to say, hey, you know what, my trauma also needs body work. I want to find this kind of a practitioner. Somatic experiencing is another modality that a lot of people rave about. I had 3 different somatic experience sessions with 3 different practitioners, and it didn't do a lot for me. That's okay. There are people who really, really love it. It just doesn't happen to be the modality that so far has worked best for me. So part of this is acknowledging, hey, if there's something stubborn in me that's not moving, if I've done all the thought work around it, and I'm actively working on changing my patterns, I'm actively working on changing my beliefs, I'm actively working on selecting for more of the experiences that I want to see, and we'll get to that in a second too. If there are bodily reactions specifically, if you are doing your best to bring your conscious awareness to your patterns, and there are still bodily reactions that are happening in you, then that may call for a facilitator who works on the somatic level, or on the energetic level, or on the bodily level, right? Those are things that, in my opinion, coaching doesn't quite get to necessarily. Now, also, I want to say that there are people who will be able to recognize, and I'm going to be making a video about this very soon as well, because this was another question that was asked. There are people who will recognize when they're having a trauma response, and they'll recognize that their body is doing something that is creating emotional havoc in their bodily ecosystem, that is related to their past trauma in a way that they will be able to recognize and learn to self-regulate. One of the things I'm planning on talking about is knowing the difference when you start to feel those emotions, right? Checking in with yourself, realizing that you're feeling them, and then being able to have the presence of mind, practicing being able to have the presence of mind enough to ask yourself in the moment, is this a crisis or is it a trigger? Is this something I'm dealing with now in the present, or is this something from the past that's coming up? And if it's something from the past that's coming up, then I know how to self-regulate. I know how to take care of my nervous system, right? I activate my parasympathetic nervous system with deep breaths. There are exercises that I can do, somatic exercise, even something as simple as grounding and giving myself a hug and patting myself on the arms like this, right? Naming the things that are around me, then I can control the reactions that my body has and understand that it's a wave, right? It's a wave that's coming to knock me over, and I can surf it, right? I can get to that place where I'm like, okay. Doing a lot of plant medicine ceremonies too will also give you a lot of practice with that, because man, sometimes plant medicine ceremonies can really mean surrendering to a wave of intensity, right? So I'm not necessarily recommending that. I'm just stating my own experience. Because there is also there's a lot of discernment that needs to go into choosing a plant medicine ceremony and deciding if it's right for you. So I'll put that out there. For me, it was great practice. It might call to you, or maybe it won't. But learning to mitigate and ultimately overcome the symptoms of our trauma responses is absolutely something that we can learn to do. Whether we learn to do that on our own or whether we work with a professional who helps us to mitigate those responses, right? Things like anxiety disorders, things like even chronic pain issues, some chronic health issues. I'm not a health practitioner, so I'm not prescribing anything, but from what I have researched and what seems to be out there in the field is that there are a lot of bodily conditions that can be solved by working through our trauma responses, through somatic practitioners such as, again, energy workers, body workers, somatic practitioners, right? So, so we have to believe in that restorative ability in order to trust a facilitator and say, okay, I'm going to go into this and I don't want to feel this way anymore. And to believe in the possibility for it to happen. And there have been so many people who have overcome so much incredible trauma and living in those trauma responses, living in that anxiety or panic or codependent patterns or addictions, and there have been so many people who have been able to harness the restorative power of their bodies with help or on their own. I mean, I'd say someone who's stuck in there probably needs, at the very least, I mean, I did it, reading a lot of books. And again, I also, like I said, I had an energy worker to do that, the part that, basically like the parts that I couldn't reach, right? The itches I couldn't scratch. If I was still feeling, upset emotions, then I would go to my energy worker and they would work with me on that. And again, like I said, there is bonus content with an interview with my energy worker to talk more about that modality. If you sign up for the Repatterning Project, and if you're already signed up, you'll be sure to see that content. I typically post it toward the end of the course so that people aren't, that seems like the right place to put it, because people are graduating and, if they're looking for additional support, I like to recommend other practitioners and other modalities. I want to touch on one last thing, which is this idea of our alienating people. Yes, absolutely. It is on us to be responsible for our trauma responses and for the way that we communicate with people, and to bring conscious awareness to our interactions and to examine patterns of where we may be causing harm, or where we may be responsible for the results of certain interactions we are getting. However, another thing that we really also owe it to ourselves to examine is how much are we focusing on those who we are alienating because we're accustomed to that because of our trauma responses and because of the stories that we create around our trauma responses that cause us to self-confirm those situations when they happen. Because I will say right now, I alienate a fuck ton of people. A fuck ton of people. There are people who have never met me, who friends of mine will bring up my name and they'll be like, ugh, Arden Lee, blah, blah, blah. Why? Because I'm human, right? Because I'm pretty fucking confronting, if you haven't noticed already. Because work that I do, or ways that I use my voice, or ways that that I hold the environments that I participate in, and the circles that I will associate myself with to certain standards of integrity, given that it is 2020 and we're in the middle of a great big global shift, and there isn't room for things like casual racism, and there isn't room for things like like bypassing and conservative economic brainwashing that even happens in the spiritual community, of believing that that money is the metric of our success or whatever. There's nothing wrong with money, trust me. The balance that I feel, I'm working all the time on my balance between, sustaining myself and finding that balance of being able to call in lots of financial abundance and still be doing it in a way that is sustainable and is fair and is involves ethical practices. Which I've seen a lot of lack of that in a lot of the coaching community. So yeah, I'm pretty fucking alienating. I have no problem with this because I know that I'm in alignment with my values. I know that I already act in according to my own integrity. So focusing on acting according to your own integrity and then focusing on the people who do show up for you, on the people who are in alignment with you, who are supportive of you. Because again, if we get stuck in the story that because of our trauma we alienate everyone, we're going to see more and more and more and more of that. And it's a two-part, there's two action steps here. And the one is to be super honest with ourselves about our behaviors, right? And to look for our patterns and look for where, we may be unconsciously emotionally dumping on people, right? Where we may be, instead of setting a container for processing, for example, we may just come up to people and start, unloading on them because we, maybe we haven't had anyone else to talk to, and they're like too much, right? So we owe ourselves to look at our patterns, and create, some relationships with people that we trust enough where we can get their feedback too. Something that has been really crucial to me has been establishing just a couple of key friendships, and I'm talking like 3 or 4, like maybe even less, maybe like 2 or 3, right? But of people whose opinions I trust, where I can go to them and say, hey, can you give me some feedback? Do you know why I'm getting these results? And then making sure that once we are in alignment with our integrity and living by our values in a way that we're happy with, making sure that we select for those people who do support us and do understand us and who do vibe with us, because we can find a million people in the world that we're going to alienate just by being ourselves. I could think of, it's like anytime we are someone, anytime we have an identity or a personality, there's going to be someone who says, I don't like you because you're a girl. I don't like you because you're gay. I don't like you because, you didn't vote for Trump, or I don't know, whatever. But we want to remove our focus from that alienation in any way that goes beyond what is a useful examination of our own behavior in those circumstances, right? And working on our trauma and working, with, as I said, the regenerative power of nature, working on mitigating our trauma responses, understanding that we are not bound to those for our entire life, understanding that transformation is possible if we commit to it and if we get the help that we need. That's going to help with that too. So we're not doomed. Our bodies are really miraculous engines. And no matter what has happened to us in our pasts, we can come to places where we realize we are safe now, in the moment, and that what's happening in our bodies, or even like, the world, There may be like bad things that happen in the world all the time, right? But we don't have to continue living in hypervigilance. We don't have to continue always being fearful and creating and more and more circumstances that confirm our fears, right? Something that will happen is our bodies will feel a thing, and then we'll want to know why, and we'll look for reasons, right? We'll look, why do I feel this awful? And then we end up like starting fights with people, or getting upset about something that's going on that may be completely unrelated to what we're feeling, but we love to be able to explain those things, right? And then by giving our energy there because we're looking for an explanation, we end up creating more of those situations. So bringing it back and creating again that cast, right? That safe container for healing, and believing in our ability to restore our bodies. And that again is an ongoing dialogue, you guys. There's still times that I get triggered by shit. There are still times that I have to, but I notice now, I'm like, oh, am I being triggered by something? Does it actually matter, right? Is this actually something I have to deal with? Or is it just like someone being stupid on the internet that I could block, or whatever? What is causing these feelings? Or if I can't search for a cause, if I can't find a cause that looks reasonable, because again, we'll assign it to other things that aren't actually the causes, so we don't want to do that either. But being able to understand just in the moment that we are safe, right? That we're safe here. One of the reasons I've created this home that I love so much is it's so important to my sense of felt safety, right? Coming into our environment and being like, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm gonna ground, right? Everything is actually okay. I'm gonna talk to a trusted friend, I'm gonna get some support. If we feel that we don't have a trusted friend in the moment, then that's something that we need to start creating by looking for those moments of connection rather than selecting for more and more moments of alienation, right? So this is a pretty big holistic picture here, but the overall theme of it is we must believe in the restorative power of our bodies so that we are not creating an identity out of our neurodevelopmental trauma that we will keep attaching to because it's all that we know and because we don't know who we would be without it. We want to start picturing who we will be without this, right? Who will we be when we are happy and living lives that are fulfilling to us and feeling in control of our choices, right? This is a pretty big one. This topic overall is pretty big. But if we're saying I have neurodevelopmental trauma that prevents me from making connections, then we owe it to ourselves to say, I'm going to work on that trauma and I'm going to release those responses from my body because I'm not living in that trauma anymore. I am not that same child. I have power now as an adult to create a sense of felt safety around myself and to self-regulate until I feel that those symptoms are getting less and less and less and less and less and less over time, and to where they're more manageable, to where we have tools in our little toolkits to be able to self-soothe in that moment and to see our relationships with our bodies get better and better and better, that we are making choices to create that sense of safety so that we can do that healing. And it is possible. And it's worked for me, and it's worked for a lot of other people. And since we all have essentially the same, we're all different and we're all unique snowflakes, I mean that in a good way. But we're essentially all given the same biological circuitry, right? With the exception of people who are born differently abled, I understand there's a lot of exceptions to that, but the regenerative power of our bodies to dispel trauma, I believe in that for everyone. So believing in that, committing to it, getting help or support where we need it, and creating that sense of felt safety to do that healing and committing over time to mitigating those responses instead of creating an identity where we live by them and we believe that we can't overcome them. We absolutely can. It is absolutely possible. And if it doesn't feel possible, then that's when we reach out and we get more help or more support to release those imprints on a bodily level. not just from the mind. What I teach is about the mind and making those decisions, right? But if there are things that feel stuck in our bodies that our minds can't reach, absolutely. And that sometimes may only take a session or two. In fact, there are a lot of instances of that only taking a session or two. So, making that decision, understanding how our circuitry works, and then making the decision to be responsible for our own healing. And then going forth and getting that support, creating our sense of felt safety, and focusing on the relationships that show up for us that create those connections. And knowing that as long as we are living in integrity with our own values, and we are examining our own behavior and what we bring to our half of the table in our friendships and relationships, understanding that as long as we are in integrity with that part, that from there it won't matter who else we alienate, because we will be attracting and connecting with the people who are meant to connect with us on an authentic level. Thank you guys for watching. I know this is a long one. It's a big topic, but hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.